It is a great honor and a privilege to introduce Daniel Brand. We're here in your beautiful apartment in Tel Aviv. And Daniel, you are the son of two unsung heroes. Your father, Joel Brand, and your mother, Hansi. And if you can tell us a little bit about the most incredible people that your parents were and the achievements that they did, because it is remarkable, it is incredible, and it's very important that we should know and appreciate.
I will try.
So we have a picture of your father and your mother. Okay, thank you so much.
Now the names are basically pronounced according to the German pronunciation, so it's not Joel, it's Joel. The letter J in Latin is J, so it is pronounced as Y. The name Hansi is a nickname, and I'm not going to mention her real name, it's too complicated for people who don't speak Hungarian. So her nickname is Hansi, written with S, not with Z, but with S. So that's just a remark.
What was her real name?
My mother's real name is like the morning star in Hungary, Hajnalka. Hajnal is the early morning. Like in Hebrew, Ayelet HaShachar, you will say. It is regarded a nice Hungarian name. Now, in the family, the names are normally, in our family, biblical names. So my name is Daniel. Normally we are saying Dani. My brother was Michael. We called him Mickey. So all we use the biblical name. My father got his name after his grandfather, who perished in Jerusalem a few months before he was born in 1906, because toward the end of in the second half of the 19th century, Joel's grandfather moved to Jerusalem and built there a synagogue and homes for his children, and passed away there in 1906, few months before my father was born, and so he got the name Joel. Both my parents came from a regular Jewish family, more or less observant, not extreme, but observant Jews. My mother, middle class. After World War I, her father lost all his savings, which were invested in Hungarian bonds, so it became zero, and the situation at home became less than middle class. My father's family was in the higher middle class. None of my parents had any specific education. They had no formal, how do you call it in English, abitur or high school, full high school degree, not to speak about university degree. Both of them were idealists that cared for people. Now that's as a beginning, and let's go toward the end of the story, and this will help us understand the other part of the story. March 1944, the German invades Hungary. Within less than 4 weeks, my father arranged a meeting with Bislitseni. Bislitseni is more or less second to Eichmann in the German establishment that was dealing with liquidating the Jewish people. Why Wislitzeny? Because Wislitzeny was the one who made 2 years earlier an agreement with the working group in Slovakia, in Bratislava, headed by Rabbi Weissmandel, and after paying him $50,000, they claim that it was only 40,000 and 10,000 was taken by the Jewish corrupt middlemen. Anyway, after $40,000 or $50,000, the deportation of Slovakian Jews were stopped for 2 years. And it was renewed only when there was a uprising against the Germans, as many Jews took part, so it collapsed, but it was after more than 2 years. Saving the Jews for 2 years is a big achievement. So the group with which my father belonged to, the Budapest Help and Assistant Refuge Committee, tried to do the same deal with the Nazis again. So they looked for that Wislitzeny, and after about 3 weeks, Yoel managed to arrange a meeting for him and for Kastner, this Wislitzeny, and told him we are willing to continue. Here it's time maybe to mention that in Bratislava they also got an offer to stop all the killings for deportation of Jews in Europe for $2 to $3 million. Not a small money, but still that money that could have been raised. Of course, they couldn't get the money and nothing came out of it. So Yoel and Kastner, when they met with Wislitzeny, they offered him, we will pay the 2-3 million and you stop all the deportation. So the response was, we are willing to go into economic deal, but not on the terms as it was in Slovakia, but in new terms. So after a while, my father was summoned. It's like a court, you don't have the option to say no, to Eichmann. And after several discussions, Eichmann gave him the proposal to go abroad and tell the joint that for 10,000 trucks, the Germans are willing to release 1 million Jews. Now, the details of these Jews are minor, non-significant versions of it, but the basic of 1 million Jews, 10,000 trucks is accepted by everybody, and it has been emphasized by all people involved. So that's not under discussion. So with this offer, Yoel travels to Istanbul, which was called by the Jews at the time Kushta, that was the Jewish name of Istanbul, Kushta from Constantinople. 2 weeks or about a week or 10 days earlier, the Jewish mission in Kushta got a telegram saying that Yoel is coming with an important mission, arrange for him a visa. The answer was, Yoel shall come, Chaim is waiting for him. So in Budapest they believed Chaim is Chaim Weizmann, because it's important, but in Istanbul and Kushta they believed the local head of the mission, Chaim Barlas, is good enough. So Yoel lands in Istanbul, 19 May 44, and there is no visa. After that, that Barlas saw him in the airport and went home. According to him, he went to arrange a visa and managed to arrange for Yoel to enter the city. But in fact, he did nothing, and the one who managed to release Yoel from the airport and let him go to the town was the Nazi criminal, as you wish, as Yad Vashem call him, Bondi Gross, who was by far better person than his description in Israeli documentation. Anyway, he knew how to speak Turkish. Do you know how you arrange things in Turkish? Bakshish.
It's a bribe. But can I just mention, your father, I think, was sent on an official aeroplane.
Yes, official German aeroplane. And Chaim Barlas said, he came with a German spy, known spy. Excuse me, it's a German official aeroplane. Who comes there? Of spies? Spies not, because it's too clear that he is a German representative. Nazi diplomats, Nazi diplomatic mail, no others. It's only official people, German officials, all of them, of course, Nazis. So that was not a reason, that was just a story. Earlier he claimed, yes, he had a visa, but because the people came with him, he was not let in. It's all nonsense, pure lies. No, all the history is modified to cover up the behavior of the Jewish authority in thwarting Yoel's rescue mission, which was intended to save many Jewish lives. And therefore everything is thwarted, because they thwarted this mission, starting with inviting him without a visa, and then a lot of other things. I will go to it later on, but now let's go to the beginning and what were my parents doing during the Holocaust. So as I said earlier, before we started this formal, let's say, interview, my father was born in Greater Hungary, moved to Germany at the age of about 4 or 5, returned to Hungary in 1934, was accepted there as a resident, married my mother there in 1935.
Here's a wonderful picture of your parents.
Yes, that's how they looked about a month before the marriage in a park in Buda. Now, in Budapest, both my parents were planning to go to Palestine, but they got no certificate, so they waited and waited. In the time the family grew, my brother was born, I was born, the family from Germany had to leave Germany and they all came to Hungary and they have to be financially supported. So my parents had to make their living for them and for the whole family, and they, I wouldn't say established, but they took the little workshop my mother started at the age of about 15 of knitting workshop and enlarged it and made it a very prosperous business. This business supported the family till the end of the war, even though Jews were forbidden from or prevented for keeping businesses during the Nazi period. But I'll come to it, my first man. This workshop supported the family, and also was used later for illegal refugees, for workplace and for meetings for their leadership. Everything was there. So that's the beginning, and we are now approaching 1939, 38, 39. According to American historian Braham and others, my parents were, as he called it, interested in refugee affairs, arranging all kind of underground activities in order to assisting refugees, according to Braham, after the Anschluss and the occupation of Poland, so something 38, 39. And because they met many refugees and helped them and fed them, always inviting them to dinner and so on, so they heard a lot of stories about what Germans are doing to the Jews. And I think they gave them the understanding that the Germans are very, very, very dangerous. So that's the background. Now we came to the year 1941. And just a word about the beginning of the Holocaust. The Holocaust didn't start in 1933 when the Nazis came to power. That was a persecution of Jews, went over the history for thousands of years, nothing new. It didn't start with the Nuremberg rules. It didn't start even with the occupation of Poland in 1939. The Holocaust started on 22nd June 1941. The Barbarossa, how do you say it, offensive, the attack of Germany on Russia. Why is this date marks the beginning of the Holocaust? Because the invading German forces included special SS unit mission to kill all the Jews in the occupied territory. That's how the Holocaust started.
It's the Hans Gruppen.
This,
it was a special group that...
It was special SS unit tasked with killing all the Jews in the occupied areas. That's the Germans. In February 1941, half a year before the Holocaust starts, a Jewish friend of my parents, Samuel Springman, heard a rumor that the Hungarian authorities are planning to deportate 100,000 Jews that have no Hungarian citizenship, what they called alien Jews, to deport them out of the territories of Hungary. He informed the Jewish authority, no one took it in seriously, and people maybe forgot it. As soon as the Germans invaded Russia, I think less than a week later, Hungary joined the war aside Germany. And within days they started implementing the plan to deport 100,000 Jews to the newly liberated areas. Now, it's not fair to blame the Hungarians that they wanted to kill all these Jews, because in June 41, or August 41 or July 41, no one had the idea that deportation means murder, because it has never happened before. The figure that the Hungarians intended to deport 100,000 Jews is also mentioned by Pinchas or Philip Freudiger in his testimony in the Eichmann trial. He mentions that the plan was to deport 100,000 Jews, or even more. Anyway, among the deportees were my mother's sister and brother-in-law. My mother has done everything to bring her sister back. The sister deported was Elizabeth or Erzsébet in Hungarian, and the brother-in-law was Lajos Stern, who was a Polish citizen. And once he's a Polish citizen, the woman goes with him. So less than 2 years ago, this book was published in America. 1941, Summer of Mass Murder, Rehearsal for the Hungarian Holocaust, by one George Eisen. And he describes this event. It is also documented by Professor Braham much earlier. Now, among the deportees were my mother's sister and brother-in-law. My mother insisted on bringing them back. My father found the Hungarian police or someone connected to the police who was willing to do it, and she paid a huge sum. How is it? Who was willing to find and bring back the two for a hefty fee. 2,000 pengu. It is many thousands of dollars. The pengu at the time was about 25 American cents, but the American dollar in 41 was about 50 or 70 dollars of today. So 10,000 pengu, you can live on it for a year. But my mother, everybody told her, you are crazy. My mother said, I will not sleep unless I know that I've done anything in my power to rescue her. So they managed to bring the two back, heard their stories, and were shocked. Other people, for example, one of the members of the Shomer HaTzair underground, his uncle was also in the deportation and also managed somehow to survive and come back, but it meant to him nothing. He didn't know that there is a Holocaust. My parents understand very well what is it, and so they made something extremely unusual. They brought the rescued brother-in-law to the Minister of Interior to tell him what happens to the deportees. And the minister was shocked and ordered to stop the deportation immediately. So that's the story. Now this story,
and that in a way saved many thousands of Jews.
At the time when the minister gave this order to stop the deportation, already 35,000 Jews were already arrested in the list to be deported, waiting for deportation, 35,000. practically less than 20,000 were deported, and 7 trains were stopped on their way to the border, 2 of them already in the border.
So, Daniel, this was one of the greatest and one of the initial rescue attempts
I think
in the
this
Shoah.
is probably the biggest success during the Shoah. Biggest success. Tens of thousands with the effort of 2 people without special connection or anything, just daring and willing to help. Now, about 2,000 from the deportees, about something around between 50 and 20,000 were deported, more between 60 and 80,000 were deported. The exact figures are not known, but about 2,000 out of them managed to come back. People like Elie Wiesel, for example, whose friend was deported, write in his book that people were sorry for the deportees, but they say, so that's what's war. That's war. When his acquaintance come back, after a year or so, survived the killings in Kamensk-Podolsk, where most of the deportees were murdered, and told the same story as my mother's brother-in-law. What Elie Wiesel write in his book, people not only refuse to believe, people refuse to listen. People didn't want to hear. All these 1,000 or 2,000 survivors spread all over Hungary and told their story. And after that, the Hungarian Jews claimed, we didn't know.
So can I just mention, because you write in your book that your mother recommended to her sister that she shouldn't appear before the authorities.
Okay, but that's not so important.
But they were law-abiding citizens and they did appear.
Yes, so that's what the most of Hungarians did, because they were law-obedient, and they didn't understood that in such times you don't have to be always law-obedient.
And she took you and your brother to a hotel and she gave you a home.
I'll go to it. I told you that according to historians, here I took from the American historian Abraham. He says, if you want to see it, that after the Anschluss and the defeat of Poland, the Brands, became particularly interested in refugee affairs, organizing a variety of rescue and relief activities. Their concern for the refugees acquired a personal tone in the summer of 41. So I told you the story of summer 41, and now we are going to the meeting with the minister. The escapees who returned to Hungary told a harrowing story of suffering and mass murder. One of the survivors, by the name of Lajos Stern, Joel Brand's brother-in-law, informed the Minister of the Interior about the details of the Kamensk-Podolsk massacres. The minister was visibly shocked and declared that he had enough of this and ordered to halt all further deportations. As I told earlier, the deportation was planned to be about 100,000 or even more. It ended in less than 20,000 because of this visit by the minister.
Actually, it saved 80,000 Jews.
Now,
Possibly.
let's look at the full picture. Nothing happens because of one ember doing one thing. There are other forces, but this was the straw that broke the camel's back. So, now this was written by the American historian Braham in Israel. And this was published by Yad Vashem. But without the researchers' knowledge, they omitted the name Layosh and the words Yoel Brand's brother-in-law. So it was just some Stern. Thousands of them existed in Hungary, and of course it has never been published in Hebrew. Only in the documentation of Yad Vashem you can hardly find it. So deliberate falsification. Now, that's why I started my research, because in 2000, when my mother passed away, I went through all her documents and recordings, and I find an interview she gave to Yad Vashem, and she told them about this event, and they said, "We don't know such thing." She said, "But it's written in the book." She said, "We know the book, but we don't know this." So I thought it must be a mistake. I had no idea that they may be falsifying deliberately. So I thought maybe Hansi, my mother was asked, "How long do you know it?" She said, "About a year." And so I said, okay, maybe there's a new edition of the book. So I realized there is really a new book, a new release. This was the interview I think was about 1995. The new book was released in 94. So I searched for it, I find a copy, and it was there. So I came to Yad Vashem to tell them. So I made an appointment with the researcher who made the interview with Hansi. When I came to the issue, he told me, "Oh, sorry, I have to go out for a few minutes." I waited more than 20 minutes, and I then went out. My wife was waiting for me. He disappeared, but she said he's sitting in the cafeteria. That's Yad Vashem. Anyway, let's continue. So, the deportation was sought, and what Braham father says, the minister was visibly shocked and declared that he had enough of this and ordered to halt all further deportations, that we said already. And here it adds, in fact, he ordered to recall 7 trains en route to the border, 2 of them already in Kölsch-Messe, that's the border station. Now, I looked for the date, when did it happen. I found in the history, in the research, only one source. Normally I prefer 2 sources at least, to be sure. I am a researcher. And so years after I wrote my book, I got a letter from a friend also from my old workplace, and he read me, "My mother was 11 years old when her family was taken by a train to the Ukraine border. It was only after I read chapter 5 of your book that I understood the unbelievable story that my mother told about how, on the way to a concentration camp in Kamensk-Podolsk on Friday, 8th of August 1941, the train stopped at the border crossing and didn't continue her way. Until the end of her life, she didn't know the reason for this. So here I had the verification that the date was 8 August.
And you got this email from...
email.
It was from Avi
Sheinkopf, also an employee of Sorek. Like he was in finance, and unlike the one who passed away,
Robert Engelman,
who was in the same group that I worked with. So you see, everything that I wrote is based on hard evidence, no stories.
And this is, we're just going to show, this is the book.
No, this is not the book. The book is the Hebrew book, but he mentions.
I know, but this is the book that you wrote.
This is the book I wrote, and the Hebrew book also I wrote. Yes, it's the same, with some differences, but basically the same.
And it's all factual. It's
everything is hardly evident, documented. The letter is not there because it came later.
Okay. But just to give an example, every statement you back it up with all the references.
All references. So
you must have been delighted when you got this email.
yes, because it gave me a proof that because in the book, in the Hebrew book, I don't remember, I said that it's likely to be the 8th of August, but it's only one source. So here I have the proof that it's another source. Now, what did my parents done after this? After this, until the German occupation, they were busy helping illegal refugees in Hungary. And here I bring some historians, what they say, because the stories is published here, that was the paper on which they are published. So here is a citation from a Hungarian historian. In February 1942, refugees from Poland and Slovakia began to arrive in Hungary. Their financial support, accommodation, legalization, equipping them with appropriate documents was taken care by local Zionist activists. It's true. She adds, Joel Brandt, as his wife and his wife Hansi, were the first to help refugees to Hungary. And not Kastner, no nonsense, Joel and Hansi. No one in Israel will admit this.
And Daniel, who's the name of the person that wrote this?
Maria Schmidt. Do you read Hungarian? I have the original Hungarian. I was lucky because I had the original Hungarian, but Yad Vashem, not Yad Vashem, other research institute published a translation of this document to Hebrew. So it exists both in Hebrew and Hungarian, but not Yad Vashem, of course. So that's, as I told you, also
because it's a very big thing, this, that they were the first to help the refugees.
They were the help. Also Braham says it, that they were, after the Anschluss, I can show you, would you like it in the book?
No, this is very good.
After the Anschluss, they become specifically interested in it, organizing various, he calls it underground affairs, and joined by Springmann. The Springmann I mentioned, who heard about the plan to deport 100,000 Jews, he's totally forgotten. So this was halting the deportation, and we see that other foreign researchers say that the Brands were the first to help illegal refugees in Hungary. Here I bring two testimonies taken from books written from a refugee who spent about 2 weeks in my room. And she wrote, it was in spring 42, I couldn't find out the exact date. I moved to Joel Brand's house. He and his wife did a lot to help refugees. I stayed there for about 2 weeks. Days after I left, the police came, searched, and asked about a girl who should be there.
And who writes this?
Hannah bin Nun, back there, in the book published in Israel, back there. I have it. And here is another story. Young Zionists, some of them refugees, set up in Budapest a workshop to forge documents. They obtained the first forms for their fake certificates from the owner of a printing house through Hansi, and therefore later she was arrested and captured.
And who writes this?
This Asher Cohen and many other sources. This is the only Israeli historian who asked the people themselves and researched the evidence and not took the stories of Bowers and so on. Now another refugee who went through our home, and he says, among the activists in the Tiul was the smuggling of Jews from Slovakia, from Poland and Slovakia, normally through Slovakia, to Hungary, which was relatively safe. Among the activists in the Tiul smuggling organization was Joel Brand, who devoted himself wholeheartedly to this operation and showed deep human attitude. His house became the center place for everything related to rescue, and he risked his family in doing so. But he and his wife Hansi did not hesitate. I remember one day they let into their home 15 members of the Zionist Jews from Poland who came through Slovakia. That is written by one Josef Kornianski, who wrote in his book, published in Israel in Hebrew.
And what is the name of the book?
On Pioneer's Mission. He's a Polish. He arrived from Poland and he arrived later in Israel before the Nazis entered Hungary. I mentioned earlier that the knitting factory, his business, was used also for rescue affairs, and here he mentions it. He says, for everything, and here we have his house became the central for everything related to, and his family. Okay, it's a little bit later, it didn't fit on the page. He mentions also the factory where the meetings were kept. And many other sources also mention the camp. Now, what was known about Yoel in 1943 in Jerusalem? In Jerusalem, there were complaints about the way how Kraus was running the Palestinian office in Budapest. And in Jerusalem, they suggested that Yoel will get equal rights in the distribution of certification, equal rights to Kraus, because Kraus behaves unfairly with the non-religious Zionist parties. Nothing came out of it, but they didn't choose Kastner. They didn't choose anything. They mentioned just Yoel, because he is helping a lot the refugees. That official Jewish agency document from 43. So they knew Yoel is a significant rescue activist in 33 in Jerusalem.
Did it materialize? Did they give certificates to your father?
They give nothing to my father.
The certificates, he wasn't...
No, he didn't get the permit. The Kraus kept everything to him and didn't allow anyone to intervene, and my father was not the one who will fight for it. So that's what was known in Jerusalem. What was known about Yoel in Istanbul in 43, sorry. The rescue action in Hungary were handled mostly by Yoel Brand, first place, Peretz Reves and others. Kastner is not mentioned at all. 1943. Kastner was invented later, and he's not in the list. The one who wrote it is Venya Pomeranz, who changed his name later, Professor Zeev Hadari. I met him once. He was amazed to see the ignorant, useless Yoel Brand's son serve as a scientific counselor in the Israeli embassy in Germany. Because they made from him such a non-human almost, and is zero in their effort to minimize his contribution to rescue. But in 43, he was the figure. Now, I have to explain how come that a few days later, Hannah Ben Nun said that he spent about 2 weeks in my room because she was young. So she were put in the children's room. He was a few years bigger, but she was still something like 15 or 16. So how come that the police came a few days after? Very simple. The housekeeper in Budapest had to report on every person staying in the house over the night. I'm not sure for 1 day, but for 2 days for sure. They were locking the gate at about 9 o'clock in the evening and opening only at 7, and you have to call them in order to open the gate to the house. That was the tradition, and they were supposed to report to the police. In order to convince him not to report on time, you have to be in very good relation with it and help him financially. The same with the local policemen, who easily notice anything unusual in a house. And my parents, they're in very good relation with their Hungarian neighbors, and no one ever betrayed them.
That's really quite remarkable.
For example, the knitting factory never mind. The knitting factory was given formally to the ownership of one of the employees. According to the documentation, her name was Kovashdine. Kovashdine means the wife of Kovashdi. That's the way names are written in Hungarian. You will see in documents my mother is called Blondne, the wife of Ban. So I think she was already a widow, but during all the war and all the anti-Jewish legislation, she never noticed anything unusual in the workshop, even though many people who knew not a word in Hungarian were going about, and she always looked at the other side and cared for the parents, so that's the way we could make our living. So that's just to show you that because the parents met and helped many refugees, they had a lot of stories, and therefore in 1941 they were already prepared that it's too dangerous to be deported. In 1939, I think, my father was drafted to the Hungarian army. Later on, the labor service was invented or established for the Jews, for non-reliable people, so he evaded it. He became ill of it, but he evaded the working battalions, and this saved him, because most of the people who were recruited to the working battalions never came back.
You have
that's his military certificate, a copy of it. The original is in the Hungarian-speaking museum in Tzfat. So my parents were always one step before the anti-Jewish legislation in Hungary. In Hungary came into force 3 Hungarian major anti-Jewish laws, not to speak about the 1920 law of numerous clauses that limited the number of Jewish students, but in 38, 39 and 40 or 41, 3 major Jews who limited the right of Jews to employ Christians, to own businesses, everything. My parents always were one step ahead, because they listened, they helped refugees, they heard the refugees, they believed the refugees, and behaved accordingly. So, 1943, after Springman managed to get contact to Jewish organization in the free world, mainly in Istanbul, but also later in Switzerland, money starts arriving from there. Now, based on a request from Istanbul to formalize the group that was assisting, the Zionist group that was assisting refugees, in order to have some formal representative entity that accept money, so they can send their money, they wanted some establishment to create. So Kastner, with his very sharp political senses, understood immediately that a good opportunity, and named, not invented the Rescue Committee of Budapest, but formally reported, I have established the rescue committee in Budapest, which started 2 years, 1.5 years before he joined the group. He was brought to the group only in 42, or mid 42, by Springman, who testified that they were looking for someone who can represent the group or the refugee interest to the Jewish community in Hungary, to get their financial support and political support. And therefore Kastner was brought by Springman to the group. Kastner invented nothing. Anyway, he reported, I have established the committee, and he named himself as CEO or something like that, even though historians admit that until later he reported about establishing the committee in, I think, January 43, until the second quarter of 43, he was the less active in the group. What made him more active? Once money started arriving, he took for his living, for the money that came to assist the refugees, for his living. The only committee member who lived from the money sent from abroad to assist the refugees. So that's the way he became more active. In early 44, Springman left the group. By the way, when the formal group was established, Kastner doesn't report Yoel as a member in his report about what he did in the Holocaust. He didn't mention Yoel as a member of the committee. He just said that Yoel took him on himself the Tiul operation, which is the rescue operation. So Yoel was the only one tasked with rescue. Only 2 persons had specific tasks in this committee. Springman, who was responsible for the communication with the free world and with finance, and Yoel, who was the main operator of the rescue. All others were doing politics. Anyway, the group came, money came, and Hansi was not member, by the way, of this committee, even though he worked with the committee and she has a lot of influence, but she was not official member.
But I think your mother was very instrumental in with documents, with forged documents.
Everywhere. We will come to it. So about helping refugees, I think we skipped this. The risk of assisting refugees in Hungary. According to one historian, the relatively more reliable, Asher Cohen, the only historian that I trust because he made interviews with the people who came from there, not asking Yad Vashem. So he says in his book, Hungary was a police station, all the time, before the Germans. And the chance of being caught was high. Why? Because the Hausmeister or the housekeeper in every house had to report and so on. The police response could be harsh. Imprisonment in a detention camp. For any help to refugees, entire families were sent to detention camps. Now, one reliable source that Bauer especially likes says as following: Yoel's helps to refugees did not put him directly in mortal danger because he was Hungarian citizen. But I can show you my new birth certificate I got from Budapest with a apostille certified document that say his father was Romanian citizen. As I told you, he was not. He had no citizenship. But of course, he was not Hungarian citizen, so he was in mortal death. But for Bauer, any lie against Yoel is an evidence.